The UFC on Paramount era begins this upcoming Saturday, January 24th, 2026. After 6 years being a part of the ESPN family, UFC is now partnered with the CBS family for the next 7 years, worth $7.7 billion. And kicking off this partnership is UFC 324, and it is an absolutely loaded fight card from top to bottom. And I've already broken down the main event fight for the interim lightweight title between Justin Gaethje and Paddy Pimblett. If you haven't seen that breakdown, be sure to go check it out. And now we have to get into the rest of the card. And the next fight up would have been the co-main event for the Bantamweight Championship, one of the greatest, biggest, most impactful women's mixed martial arts bouts of all time between Kayla Harrison and a returning GOAT in Amanda the Lioness Nunes. But instead, less than 2 weeks out from when the bout was scheduled to take place, Kayla Harrison would have to withdraw from the bout due to a neck injury, herniated disc in her neck that required nearly immediate surgery. The UFC flew her to New York. She met with the doctors and she had a successful operation, and now we just await her recovery and timetable for a return, hopefully before the end of 2026. But luckily for the UFC brass and for fight fans, this card was already loaded, and so it was easy to replace that co-main event. And although the magnitude isn't quite there, we are getting arguably a bigger star than both of those ladies, and that is none other than the Sugar Show, Sean O'Malley, as he will be competing in the co-main event in a pivotal bantamweight clash with Song Yadong. This will be Sean O'Malley's first fight since October of 2022 not involving gold on the line, and first fight since March of 2024 against an opponent not named Merab Dvalishvili. We all know by now that Sean O'Malley is undoubtedly one of the biggest names in the Ultimate Fighting Championship, and the company put the rocket on the back of Sean after his Dana White Contender Series performance over 8 years ago. He was fast-tracked to a title with only one hiccup along the way, and then he would get that very, very big win in that aforementioned October 2022 bout against Petr Yan in a very competitive, razor-close split decision that would grant him the shot at Aljamain Sterling's bantamweight throne, and he would seize that moment with a knockout to become the 135-pound champion and then successfully defend that title in March of 2024 against Marlon Chito Vera to get back the only loss that he had up until that point in the UFC. But after that, Sean O'Malley would have to face the inevitable machine, the unstoppable force that is Merab Dvalishvili, and he would lose that championship in September of 2024 at Noche UFC, the biggest event of 2024 and arguably one of the biggest production events that the UFC has ever put on in its 30-plus year history. And that bout would go the full 25 minutes, and then the UFC would grant Sean O'Malley an immediate rematch against Merab Dvalishvili in June of 2025. Not an immediate rematch, by the way, from Merab, because he defended at UFC 311 first and defeated Umar Nurmagomedov, who's also competing on this upcoming weekend's card. We'll talk about him in a few minutes. And in the rematch, Merab would not allow this fight to go to the judges a second time, as he would submit Sean O'Malley in the final seconds of round 3 for the second of 3 successful title defenses in 2025 for the now former champion as well, Merab, because the previously mentioned Petr Yan would dethrone him at UFC 323 just a little over a month and a half ago. So now Sean O'Malley is back in a very big get-right spot for him, because if he can get the victory against Song Yadong, it's not that crazy to think that the UFC would fast-track him right back into another title shot against Petr Yan, a rematch that many mixed martial arts purists have been waiting to see for years. And stylistically here in this bout at UFC 324 against Song Yadong, it is absolutely not out of the realm of possibility for O'Malley to do exactly what the UFC would like him to do, and that is get back in the win column. But for what it's worth, it's by no means going to come easy, because Song Yadong is absolutely one of the most underappreciated ranked fighters, not only in the bantamweight division, but in the entire UFC. Song made his UFC debut in November of 2017 when he was only 20 years of age, yet he already has a plethora of high-level experience in the UFC already, and is still just 28 and not even in those prime years just yet. He is 11-3-1 in the UFC, and his only losses come against Petr Yan, the now champion, Corey Sandhagen, a former title challenger, and a very competitive bout with Kyler Phillips way back in March of 2021. But we can't ignore the fact that he also holds victories over Marlon Chito Vera, Marlon Moraes, a former title challenger, both of them as a matter of fact, Ricky Simone, Chris Gutierrez, and most recently, a technical decision against the former two-weight world champion and Olympic gold medalist Triple C himself, Henry Cejudo. Now, Song Yadong looked incredible in that bout back in February of 2025 in Seattle, Washington, that main event slot against Cejudo, up until Song Yadong would poke Henry Cejudo in the eye that caused enough damage to have the fight waved off early. However, enough time had passed in that bout for it to be ruled a decision for the fight in rounds that have already occurred to be judged by the judges, and that is why Song was able to get a W rather than a no contest. All in all, he's won 3 of his last 4 bouts and 6 of his last 8, and he is a stand-up, swing and bang, rock'em sock'em robot style of fighter. And we haven't really seen Sean O'Malley face many other fighters like that, but to be fair, we haven't really seen Song Yadong take on anyone like Sean O'Malley either. The closest comparison would be that Corey Sandhagen matchup back in September of 2022, where Sandhagen would ultimately finish Song Yadong late in that bout. All of the pressure and eyeballs are absolutely on Sean O'Malley in this circumstance. This is a fight for him to stay away from a 3-fight losing streak, mind you, and facing someone with nowhere near the name value that he holds as well. And a loss to Song Yadong would send him pretty significantly down the totem pole if we're talking title contenders at 135 pounds, and I wouldn't even be surprised if he decided to move up to featherweight with a loss here at UFC 324. Whereas for Song Yadong, this is a low-risk, high-reward opportunity for him to prove that he belongs within the title contention talk of the bantamweight division, win his 2nd consecutive bout, 4th of his last 5, and against one of the top 5 biggest names in all of mixed martial arts right now in Sean O'Malley. So we will see if the long-ranging technical precision ace that is Sean O'Malley with his 3-inch height advantage and 5-inch reach advantage will be able to capitalize on those numbers, or if Song Yadong will be able to close the distance, keep this fight in the pocket, and overwhelm Sean O'Malley with some phone booth style fighting. Be sure to let me know down in the comments below your predictions for this massive bantamweight fight and what you think is at stake for both Sean O'Malley and Song Yadong. Depending on how the winner gets their hand raised, if it's convincing enough, can they get the crack at the bantamweight strap next? Next, we head to a big matchup for the big fellas in the heavyweight division, as the 5th ranked Waldo Cortes Acosta will be taking on the Black Beast and number 8 ranked heavyweight Derrick Lewis. With how bad the heavyweight division was in 2025, this fight desperately has to kickstart things for 2026. It was horrendous last year. But one of the bright spots for this weight class in 2025 was Waldo Cortes Acosta himself, who had 5 fights in 2025, winning 4 of them, with 3 out of the 4 coming by way of knockout, including his last 2 in a row that came within 3 weeks of one another, and his only loss came to former interim title challenger Sergey Pavlovich. Last year, WCA would welcome Ryan Spann to the heavyweight division and knock him out. Then he would get a decision win over the polar bear Sergey Spivak, lose that fight to Pavlovich, although it was a contested decision, then fight 2 times in November. On November 1st, he knocked out the former PFL champ Ante Delia. After kind of being knocked out in his own right, but then it was actually just due to an eye poke. The fight got stopped, then it got restarted, then Ante was celebrating the win, then he had to get back into fight shape, and then he got knocked out within seconds. It was absolutely bonkers, and just continued to add to the drama that this division had last year. But it was still an incredible way for Waldo to bounce back within the same exact fight that he was essentially knocked out in, and then 3 weeks later to the day, on November 22nd in Qatar, he would knock out Shamil Gaziev. And this will already be Waldo's 12th fight since debuting in late 2022, and he is far and away the most active heavyweight on the entire UFC roster right now. And I'm telling you, if he beats Derrick Lewis, and especially if he picks up a 3rd straight knockout over Derrick Lewis, he should be fighting the winner of Tom Aspinall versus Ciryl Gane whenever that rematch goes down this year. And damn it, if for some reason Tom Aspinall can't recover in enough time from eye surgery, and the UFC decides to do an interim title fight with Ciryl Gane, then it should absolutely be the winner of this fight, to be quite frank, and especially if it's Waldo. And in the same amount of time that Waldo has been in the UFC, Derrick Lewis has only fought 5 times, so WCA has more than doubled the amount of action that the Black Beast has had over the last couple of years. However, he does have a winning percentage in those 5 fights, with 3 victories and 2 losses, and of course all 3 victories are by way of knockout. And for what it's worth, the 40-year-old Lewis is also on a 2-fight knockout win streak heading into this bout, much like his opponent, and those knockouts were against Rodrigo Nascimento in May of 2024, and then a knockout against the 6'8" giant Taliesin Teixeira last summer in Nashville. And if you stretch it back just a little further, he's actually won 3 of his last 4 bouts, with the only loss coming Jailton Almeida in November of 2023, so he has definitely flipped the script later on in his career, because at one point Derrick Lewis had lost 4 out of 5 bouts between August of 2021 and February of 2023. And I think that you can just as easily justify a title shot for Derrick Lewis with a big-time victory and knockout here as you can for Waldo, to be quite honest, especially when you consider that Derrick Lewis is arguably the biggest name in the heavyweight division right now amongst active contenders. And Derrick Lewis, from what I've seen on social media, looks to be in some of the best shape that I've ever seen him in, and it's not crazy to say that we've also seen some pictures of him in years past where he looks great and then he gets to fight week and he looks pretty normal. So we'll see come Friday on weigh-ins and Saturday when he steps in the cage what the physique looks like. But no matter what he looks like, you can never count the big man out with his absolutely lethal one-punch knockout power that has solidified him as the all-time leader in knockouts in the company's history. And you best believe that this fight will not even come close to touching the canvas unless that is someone's ass getting put on it by way of strikes on the feet. Next up, we move to the women's flyweight division and my second most anticipated bout on this fight card, and it's pretty close to being the most anticipated, but it's hard not to be excited for that car crash that we're going to have in the main event. And this fight will be between Natalia Silva and Rose Namajunas. A title shot at flyweight is absolutely on the line. The winner of this fight will be facing the queen, Valentina Shevchenko, in the latter half of 2026. I don't doubt it for a second. The number 2 ranked Natalia Silva is one of the most high-level strikers in all of women's mixed martial arts right now and is 7-0 in the UFC since debuting back in June of 2022, and that was against Jasmine Jasudavicius, mind you. That has aged like a fine wine. But not only does she have a victory over her, she also holds victories over Andrea Lee, a perennially ranked flyweight during her time in the company, Viviane Araújo, still a top 15 flyweight, Jessica Andrade, a former strawweight champion and a ranked strawweight and flyweight, and most recently, a decision win over former flyweight champion Alexa Grasso that came in May of 2025 at UFC 315. And don't get it twisted, if it wasn't for Alexa Grasso, the originally scheduled opponent for Rose Namajunas for this UFC 324 bout having to pull out due to injury, Natalia Silva, in my opinion, should have already been next for Valentina Shevchenko, but she decided to step in on short notice and save this bout against Rose instead. At just 28 years of age, just now getting ready to enter her prime, Natalia already has 25 professional bouts under her name with a 19-5-1 record and has finished 12 of her 19 victories with 7 submissions and 5 knockouts, and has not tasted defeat since December 16th of 2017 at Thunder Fight in Brazil, and that came against Marina Rodriguez, mind you. Meaning that all in all, when you stretch past the UFC run of Natalia Silva that is 7-0, she is on a 13-fight win streak, and is my prediction to be the woman that can dethrone Valentina Shevchenko in this flyweight division. But we can't get to that fight unless she gets through Rose Namajunas first, a former 2-time strawweight champion and now turned a flyweight title hopeful if she gets a victory here against Silva. For Thug Rose, who is one of the biggest names in all of mixed martial arts, she is still just 33 years of age. She is right in her prime, even though she has already accomplished all that you can being a professional mixed martial artist. But I love that she still has this passion and this fire within her to become a 2-weight world champion. That is her hunger. That is what keeps her going in this fight game after running the gauntlet at 115 pounds, winning the title 2 separate times, and beating the best strawweights that the division has ever seen, including Joanna Jędrzejczyk twice and Zhang Wei Li twice. And we saw Rose Namajunas make her way to the flyweight division after losing to Carla Esparza in May of 2022 in one of the worst fights in company history, and her debut at flyweight in the UFC would come against Manon Fiorot. That was in September of 2023 in Manon's home country of France, where she would compete very closely with Manon, but ultimately lose the decision and also suffered an injury to her hand in that fight as well. But since then, Rose has tallied off 3 of her last 4 fights at 125 pounds, with the only other loss coming to Erin Blanchfield. So both of her losses are to top 5 opponents, and one of them a former title challenger now in Fiorot. And the other, probably a future title challenger in Blanchfield, to be quite frank. But the victories that she holds are Amanda Ribas, Tracy Cortez, and most recently in June of last year in Atlanta, Miranda Maverick. So for what it's worth, the losses that Rose has suffered in the flyweight division are definitely against the best competition, whereas the 3 victories come against good names, don't get me wrong, but not up to par with the names of Blanchfield and Fiorot, who she lost to. And I would put Natalia Silva in that category with Blanchfield and Fiorot, not the 3 3 people that Rose has victories against at 125 pounds, and Rose even said to Ariel Helwani that this is a much more difficult test for her than her originally scheduled opponent in Alexa Grasso, the former champion. And this just feels like a fight that is going to be extremely high level. 2 of the best women's mixed martial artists on the planet vying for an opportunity to fight for gold before the end of 2026 against the second greatest female fighter of all time, in my opinion, Valentina Shevchenko. High stakes, high reward is on the line here, and as a Natalia Silva stan, I would love to see her get the job done and finally get her crack at UFC gold. But if she's going to lose that opportunity, at least it'll come to Rose Namajunas, a women's mixed martial arts legend in the making. Next up is the main card opener at featherweight in an absolute guaranteed banger of a fight at 145 pounds between Arnold Almighty Allen and Lord Jean Silva, number 6 versus number 10 at featherweight. Even though Arnold Allen is ranked number 6 in the world at 145 pounds, he is absolutely still underappreciated and underrated as a mixed martial artist, in my opinion. I mean, come on. He started his UFC tenure 10-0 before he started to get respect put on his name, and then unfortunately the momentum would have to be halted with back-to-back losses to Max Holloway in April of 2023 and Movsar Evloev, the still undefeated phenom, in January of 2024. However, Arnold Allen did bounce back. He got a little bit of that momentum and pep back into his step with a July 2024 victory over Giga Chikadze. However, we haven't seen him fight since, so over a year and a half out of action for Allen, and he's coming back against one of the most dangerous fighters in the weight class in Jean Silva. The Fighting Nerd picked up a victory on Dana White Contender Series in 2023 to earn a contract into the promotion, and that came against Kevin Vallejos, which is a big opponent considering he's now a top 15 featherweight in his own right after his 3-0 debut year last year. And that is also the last time that we saw Jean Silva go to a decision, because he fought 5 consecutive times to begin his UFC career with 5 straight finish victories, including an absolutely devastating finish over Bryce Mitchell in April of 2025 that really put the Fighting Nerd on the map. And then in Jean Silva's biggest opportunity, his first ever UFC main event, Noche UFC headliner last year in San Antonio, Texas, he would take on, at that point, the former title challenger Diego Lopez, entering off of his title fight loss to Alexander Volkanovski back in April on that same card that Silva finished Mitchell, and they would compete in a back and forth rock'em sock'em robots war up until Diego Lopez would land a spinning back elbow to put away Silva. And that would actually end up earning Diego Lopez another crack at Alexander Volkanovski for the title coming up next week. So now, for the first time since November of 2018, Jean Silva is entering a fight coming off of the heels of a loss, meaning that he would go from November of 2018 all the way through to September of 2025 undefeated, with 12 of his 13 victories during that 7-year stretch coming by way of finish. He is an absolute force to be reckoned with in this 145-pound weight class. However, his opponent Arnold Allen holds a record of 20-3, and all 3 of his losses have come by way of decision. He is one of the more durable featherweights on the planet right now, which could inevitably lead to an absolute firecracker of a bout here to kick off UFC 324's main card. And not only from an X's and O's perspective does this deliver and check all the boxes for a fight fan, but then you peel back the curtain and take a look at the storylines for Arnold Allen, his first fight in a year and a half. Can he hold his spot amongst the title contenders and position himself where he is just one more win away, in my opinion, from a title shot? Or can Jean Silva rebound from his first loss in over 7 years to Diego Lopez, launch himself into the top 10 and close to the top 5, and position himself arguably one win away from a title shot as well? And now we move from the main card to the prelim headliner, and oh, what a prelim headliner it is. A fight that could easily main event a fight night card, or even be a co-main event at a numbered fight card, to be quite frank with you, and that is Umar Nurmagomedov versus Deiveson Figueiredo, a big-time clash at 135 pounds, very similar to the co-main event between Sean O'Malley and Song Yadong. And to be quite honest with you, I wouldn't be surprised that whoever gets the more impactful victory between Umar Nurmagomedov and Deiveson and Sean O'Malley and Song Yadong could position themselves as the next #1 contender. It may not be as black and white as just saying, well, Umar's going to get the next crack if he wins against Figgy, which seems to be the narrative heading into UFC 324, at least from what I've seen. Umar, at 30 years old, is right in his prime and is unquestionably one of the most elite talents in this bantamweight division. It's not even up for debate at this point, as he is 7-1 in the UFC, and the only loss in the company and in his entire professional career so far was against Nurmagomedov at UFC 311 last January in a very highly contested 48-47 decision loss. But we know that Umar can bounce back from a loss and tasting defeat for the first time ever, because we saw him do it at UFC 321 in October with a decision over the surging Mario Bautista, who entering that night was on like an 8-fight win streak in his own right. Now, I will say that that wasn't the most entertaining bout that I've ever seen, so I'm going to be very curious to see how Umar will approach this bout with the veteran Figgy, because he is an absolutely massive betting favorite. Everyone is anticipating him to get the victory, but can he do it in decisive fashion and pick up his first finish victory since January of 2023, over 3 years ago? Because we know what Umar is going to want to do. Once he can navigate this bout in the opening minutes, and it may just be the opening seconds to be quite honest, he is going to shoot in for a takedown, and considering that Deiveson Figueiredo only has a 57% takedown defense, I do believe that Umar is going to find plenty of success in that realm. But once he gets Figueiredo down to the ground, can he do something with it? Can he get a ground and pound finish? Can he get a submission? Can he just hunt to deal some damage and solidify himself as the next man up? That is what I want to see if I'm an Umar Nurmagomedov fan. And for Deiveson Figueiredo, the former two-time flyweight champion turned bantamweight title hopeful, it is a very big uphill battle, and we all know that. He started his bantamweight run great with 3 consecutive wins over Rob Font, Cody Garbrandt, and Marlon Vera, but when he went to that next level against Petr Yan, against Corey Sandhagen, that is where we saw him falter. A decision to Yan, the now champion, and a TKO loss to Corey Sandhagen last May. But for what it's worth, Figueiredo did bounce back with a victory over the 15th ranked Montel Jackson in October, who was on a massive win streak and had a ton of momentum heading into that fight. But at 38 years of age, time is no longer on the side of Deiveson Figueiredo, especially in these lower weight classes, and I just really am curious to see how he can approach this fight against Umar, because I struggle to see him getting any success, because even if he can keep this fight standing, which not a lot of people think he's going to be able to do, it's not like Umar is a slouch on the feet. He is very technical and very precise with his strikes as well, something that sets him apart from some of the other Dagestani style fighters. So I truthfully just feel that Umar can get the job done no matter where this fight goes, but if Deiveson Figueiredo can pull this upset off, it will absolutely be one of the frontrunners for upset of the year come the end of 2026, and he could just be able to position himself for a title opportunity. And now I just want to touch on some of the other most notable fighters and stories throughout the remainder of the prelims to finish out the breakdown, and it is Atiba Gautier that we have to discuss next. The silent assassin out of Africa at just 23 years of age is an absolute unit. Looks like he's chiseled out of stone, holds a record of 9-1 with 8 of his 9 wins coming by way of knockout, and he had a massive 3-0 debut year in 2025 with 3 straight knockout victories, all 3 of them in the opening round, and he is now taking on the 10-3 Andre Pulayev to kickstart his 2026, and I'm just going to be honest with you, Atiba Gautier is the biggest prospect on the outside looking in of the top 15 in this middleweight division right now, and by the end of 2026, he could really have his name in the mix. He is a generational talent, at least that's what it looks like right now on paper, and very much represents the next generation of mixed martial arts. So if he picks up a 4th consecutive win in the UFC, especially if it's a 4th consecutive knockout, the UFC will officially strap the rocket to his back and send him to the moon. This man is a problem and someone to keep your eyes on at 185 pounds. The perennially ranked top 15 light heavyweight Nikita Krylov is back, returning to UFC 324 to take on Modestas Bukauskas in a fight that is guaranteed to not go the full 15 minutes if you ask me. And a lot of that is due to Nikita Krylov, who has 41 professional bouts and has only ever seen the scorecards 4 times. 37 out of 41 fights have ended by way of stoppage. Oh my word. And while Nikita Krylov was on a 3-fight win streak between July of 2022 and March of 2023, he has not had success since then, entering UFC 324 with back-to-back knockout losses both in 2025 against Dominic Reyes and Bogdan Guskov, and now here against Modestas Bukauskas, it's possible that he could suffer his 3rd consecutive knockout loss. Somehow, someway, the 31-year-old Bukauskas is still not in the top 15 of this light heavyweight division. Even Even though he has gone 6-1 since returning to the UFC, with his only loss coming to Vitor Petrino back in 2023, and since then he's won 4 consecutive bouts with 3 out of 4 by way of finish. How he's not ranked in this absolutely lackluster light heavyweight division blows my mind, but if he picks up the victory here against Krylov, I can no longer complain about that, as come Tuesday morning, he will have a number next to his name. We have a very low-key flyweight scrap between 2 top 15 fighters early on in the night, between Alex Perez, the former title challenger, and Charles Johnson, number 11 versus number 13 respectively. And the big storyline for this fight is that these two fighters are on completely opposite career trajectories, as Perez will enter this fight having lost 5 of his last 6 bouts, with his only victory coming against Matheus Nicolau in April of 2024. And of those 5 losses, 4 of them have come by way of finish, including the last 2 to Asu Almabayev in November and to Tatsuro Taira in June of 2024. Now, for what it's worth, I know the momentum isn't there for Perez, but those 5 losses have come to Deiveson Figueiredo in a championship fight, Alexandre Pantoja, a former champion with 4 title defenses, Mohamed Mokaev, a still undefeated fighter that never should have been released from the UFC, Tatsuro Taira, a future title challenger and future champion in my opinion, and Asu Almabayev, someone that is still in the top 10 of flyweight. He has been fighting the best fighters in the world at 125 pounds over the last 5 years, whereas the opponents for Charles Johnson haven't quite been up to par with that of Perez. However, he enters this fight having won 5 of his last 6. Do you see the difference? His most recent fight was a knockout over Lonier Kavanaugh back in August, and his only loss since November of 2023 came in March of last year to Ramazan Tamirov in a very competitive decision. Charles Johnson, at 35 years of age, has been around for quite some time, and he is always in very competitive bouts. Whether he's winning or he's losing, he is not going down without a scrap, and it's going to be the same here against Alex Perez, except this time he has the opportunity to inch himself closer to the top 10 of 125 pounds. And the last 2 fighters that I want to talk about is Alexander the Great Hernandez in the lightweight division and Josh Hokett in the heavyweight division. Alexander Hernandez, the Great Ape, is having a big-time career resurgence, entering UFC 324 on a 4-fight win streak, with his last 2 victories coming by way of knockout, the most recent against Diego Ferreira in September, and before that he would halt the lightweight momentum of Chase Hooper in the first round with a knockout. And at 33 years of age, he is right in his prime, and he is finally putting it all together and reaching the potential that he once talked a big game on years ago, entering that fight against Donald Cerrone that a lot of MMA fans will never let him forget. And he is taking on the 39-year-old, 43-fight professional veteran Michael the Menace Johnson, who even at 39 years young has actually won 4 of his last 5 bouts, including 3 straight wins heading into Saturday's fight with Hernandez. This is going to be a scrap that you cannot miss on the prelims. And lastly is one of the biggest prospects in the heavyweight division right now, Josh Hokett, on the outside looking into the top 15, having his second UFC bout so far as he takes on Denzel Freeman, who just won his UFC debut in late 2025 as well. Hokett has a perfect 7-0 record with 4 knockouts and 3 submissions, a 100% finish rate, all of them happening between October of 2023, his first ever pro fight by the way, at Bellator 300, and November 8th of last year when he took on Max Jimenez in his debut, where he would knock him out in less than a minute. But this one may not come as easy for Hokett, as his opponent Freeman is 7-1 with 5 finishes in his own right, 4 knockouts and 1 submission, and is 34 years old, so still in the prime when you consider that he's a heavyweight, and he has won his last 3 fights with 2 of the 3 by way of finish, except his debut in the UFC wasn't as memorable as Hokett's. It was a relatively lackluster decision win over Marek Bojilo. So we'll see if Hokett will be able to capitalize on his hype and continue his momentum into the 2026 year, and I wouldn't be surprised that if he gets a big-time finish here against Freeman, he finds himself against a top 15 heavyweight next, but maybe Freeman can play big-time spoiler on Saturday night and inch himself closer to the top 15 instead. So that is it for the UFC 324 fight card. Out of the 13 bouts happening on this card, I talked and broke down 11 of them. It is absolutely loaded from top to bottom, and now it's time for me to turn it over to you. I want you to give me your predictions, your bets, and everything in between on this UFC 324 324 debut Paramount card down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new, because we are inching so close to the 1,000 subscriber mark, and it's possible that we can still hit it before UFC 324 commences on Saturday evening. And not only do I break down the biggest and best fights and storylines heading into each card, but I also recap the most meaningful results in the aftermath, and I give my thoughts and opinions on MMA news and fight announcements. You can also join the community on social media at Verbal Spar MMA on X, Instagram, and TikTok, as well as like the Facebook page Verbal Sparring MMA, and you can follow on your favorite audio listening platforms such as Spotify and Apple, where every Monday and Friday during peak fight season, podcast episodes are released there. Have a great weekend, enjoy the fights, and I will see you in the next video.